An Old Friend, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. Benjamin had never experienced real loss before. Both of his sets of grandparents were still living, and both sets of grandparents were loving, too. He'd known so many of his friends who'd not been so lucky, either having lost their grandparents very early on in their childhoods, or having been burdened with progenitors that just weren't the kind people that Ben associated with grandparents. In addition to still having his grandparents, all of his high school friends were living. All of his childhood friends from so long ago in Mayflower, Louisiana were also still living. His parents were the picture of good health. And the list went on and on. Not car accident, nor drowning, nor cancer, nor suicide, nor old age had touched down to remind Ben of how fragile life is. At 24, he considered himself to be luckier than he deserved. He honestly tried to thank God for the blessing nightly, though he sometimes forgot amid the haze of Tylenol PM that he used each evening to help him cut through his long-held insomnia. Those little blue pills helped him only last through 2 episodes of a late-night Ancient Aliens Wednesday marathon on the History Channel. For that, he was also thankful. Ben didn't have his first class to teach there at the university until 10 a.m., something that he would have killed for during his undergraduate years. Now that he was a graduate student, teaching his days away to offset some of the tuition of his advanced studies, early mornings weren't as dreaded. Insomnia or no. This was because he now was on the hook to attend long, wandering 3-hour lectures in the evenings. 4 years ago, Ben would have thought that to be a generous offering. Now, he only saw it as a means of packing too much into his brain for a single sitting. At any rate, his Wednesday night's serving of sleep promised to be blessedly full. Unfortunately, his sleep was troubled. Nightmares battered him. The bad dreams weren't novels. No, they were strange vignettes, flashes of horrors that he had not yet had to experience in his real life. This unconscious penance for a life of happiness was not at all uncommon for those few hours Ben did get to sleep. Everything from killer clowns to robbers to indescribable inhuman monsters to faceless horrors that were no less threatening than the hordes of other demons seeking to poke and prod at every fear that Ben had ever held throughout his life. Even though he'd slept more than his usual 6 hours then, Ben awoke slightly confused, quite a bit sweaty, and not at all rested when his phone rang and buzzed its way into falling off of his nightstand, crashing to the floor with a louder than one would expect clap on his cement dorm floor. Ben rolled over and picked the phone up. Thank goodness. The screen hadn't broken. He'd made several notes to and for himself so very many times that he had to figure out some other resting place for his phone. Every time it flopped off the stand, he was risking breaking a device he could not afford to replace. Then he saw the time. 7 a.m. His stomach went into knots. Firstly, no one ever called him anymore, period. He was always too busy for fun, and his family relied on seeing him on Sundays for their brief time with him each week after their church service. 6 missed calls. All 6 from Mom. Those knots began to coil and roll and grow in his abdomen. all he could think was a question. Had he thanked God for his blessings last night? He pressed the callback button on his missed calls list and held his breath as he heard it ringing. As it turned out, it was, indeed, time for Benjamin to experience loss. His mother was calling nonstop to try to get him to come home in a hurry. The dog that he'd had from his 4th birthday on was dying. Buster was a scrappy little gray and white terrier and dachshund mix that they'd saved from a kill shelter 19 years ago. Buster had been Ben's best friend as they'd moved all over Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, Missouri, and Arkansas for his dad's work as a construction foreman. That's why they'd gotten Buster for him in the first place. His parents knew well that they'd have to be relatively itinerant, and the little dog was meant to be a friend Ben could take with him no matter how many times they had to relocate. Now that Ben was in the dorms, he couldn't have Buster with him, and Ben felt guilty about this daily. Just like the rest of his family, Ben only saw the pup on Sundays. After church and before Ben had to retreat back to the confines of the dormitory to prepare for his Monday doings. Sometimes the parting was too much, and Ben would sleep at his parents' house in order to snuggle his aging friend. They did all know this was coming, though. Just a few months before, the family had taken Buster to a vet, a rarity for the family that sometimes had trouble paying their electricity bill. But their little buddy was clearly hurting, and they couldn't have that. The vet was far too serious upon re-entering the waiting room after the x-rays, and he brought news to match his affect. Buster's spine had gone crooked, and that was the cause of the pain and Buster's slackening ability to walk and jump and play. They were given the option to put Buster down that day, but they just couldn't do it. They couldn't choose to kill their friend. The burden of having to take care of Buster and, quite literally, hold him up to where he could eat, drink, urinate, and defecate fell to Ben's mother. He would never forget this. Not for the remainder of his life. He would never live down the guilt he felt from not having been the one to help Buster at the end, to be there for his friend. So, after the call from his mother, Ben rushed home that morning, calling in to the department secretary to let them know that he'd be canceling his classes for the day as he had a family emergency. He didn't make it, though. Buster passed away in the arms of Ben's mother and father, his younger brother choosing to sit away from the scene in the next room over. Upon hearing the news, Ben was stunned. He did not yell, or wail, or cry, or sob. He simply sat quietly by his brother on the couch, staring into nowhere. For so long, he'd fully avoided this taste of what mortality had to offer. Death, he found, wasn't bitter. It was something else entirely. It took the taste from everything else. Light darkened, smiles crumbled, and fell into pained frowns. Eyes closed, jaws clenched. Everything became off. That was, of course, just the first of a battery of bits of harsh reality that Ben experienced in his life. Shortly after Buster, Ben lost his first granddad. Then, his first grandmother shortly afterward. In the span of 3 years, to old age, disease, accidents, suicide, Ben had lost all the members of his family except his little brother. Ben liked to say that, along with Buster's spine, his life had gone crooked. Thank you for listening to An Old Friend, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. All the music and sounds present come from freesound.org and are being used under Creative Commons public domain licenses. As a side note, I did want to mention, for those that follow on Instagram at @ProsPodcast, you already know that I am participating in Inktober. Now, as I am not at all skilled with a pen or a paintbrush, what I do is give myself 15 to 45 minutes and only 1,000 to 1,500 words to write on each of the Inktober prompts. Certainly, I would love to hear from any of those that have Inktober stories. I would love to see your art if anyone would like to participate and write some stories along with me to maybe be featured on Prose. Send all of that to prospodcast@gmail.com. Honestly, I'd love to see what people are doing out there. It's a challenging thing to do over the course of October, but you should do it. It's very rewarding. Now, the reason I mention this now is because this story is the first of technically 31 stories you will hear that was composed in that manner. It actually comes from October 8th's prompt, Crooked. So, again, thank you for listening to An Old Friend, the first of many Inktober, or what I redub Write-tober, stories that will be coming your way. Please stay tuned for our next story, Mightier, which is based on the October 6th Inktober prompt, Sword. See you there.